Welcome back. We're going to today extend the end-tier architecture to handle caching. So remember we talked about how the end-tier architecture works. We have a presentation layer, which is Voltaire, which calls the business logic layer, that calls the data access layer. The data access layer interacts with the database through the EDMX, or the context entity framework. Well, there's a new kind of concept, not a new concept, but a concept, a new to you concept. um, think about this: the heaviest cost in the process between the presentation and the database we talked about was going to the database and actually within the database making a connection to the database, authenticating to the database. If you run a profiler against that action, that's where your biggest hit's going to be. So how do we avoid going to the database? Is it possible to avoid going to the database to get data? Well, when you're talking about web applications, a lot of the web applications are, how can I say, dumb. They're not holding data like a normal fat client application is. I have to go out of my way if I want to carry data forward from one page to the next, either through view state or through session variables or some other method. Session variables are tricky to clean up. Session variables means that it's the session that you're in, and the variables time out as the session times out. And that could be 20 minutes. So some of that data could be stale. So there's another object we can exploit called the cache. The cache is, and there's two reasons to cache. One would be, and this goes back to CIS 260. You would cache what you've just used, and you cache what you think you're going to use. There's a pretty good chance that if I just use the record in the last page, I'll probably use it in the next page. So if the record didn't change, why bother going back to the database every single time you need that record? That's the thing we're trying to solve here. So I've got a form called volunteer. And I eventually want to show volunteer information. In other words, name, address, and so forth. Well, if I look at the form, I go into the form, I've got a load page event. Skip all this stuff. Load page. I know what the current membership user is, and I can figure out the user ID from the current membership. So this 4 lines of code is going to figure out what the user ID is based on the currently logged in user. Well, using that currently logged in user, I want to pull his volunteer information. Well, normally I'd go from here to the BLL, call list volunteers, and then go to the DAL and call list volunteers and pull the single record that resolves to this user ID. But instead I'm going to introduce another layer called cache. We've got another middle tier project. Business logic layer we know about, data access layer, cache layer. This is going to call the cache. What the cache is going to do, and I'll open up our class here. What the cache is going to do, I've got a method called list volunteers. It's going to pass in a volunteer. It's going to see, is that cache, is that record in the cache? Is that object in the cache? If it is, extract it from the cache and use it from the cache. If it's not, go out and actually pull from the business logic layer and then, oh, by the way, insert it into the cache. So the first time through, I don't expect the volunteer record to be here. The second time through, it will be here. Let me show you. Let's walk through the process. We're going to go into volunteer. I've got a breakpoint. I'm going to start my program. I've got this page as my startup page. I also have the authentication turned on, so it's going to make me authenticate. Wow, my CSS is all messed up. I'll get into that in a minute, but okay, so I log in. Okay, I've got my user ID in memory. I'm ready to call the cache. The cache is going to run. This is me trying to see if it's in the cache, if that ID, which is the GUID, is in the cache. It's not. So that means go get the BLL record. It's doing its thing, and then insert that record into the cache. I'll explain what these different parameters mean. So I inserted the record into the cache. I'll return that record back to the presentation layer. Don't worry about this. There's more to come. I'll actually paint the screen later on. Let's refresh the screen. When I refresh the screen, it's going to do the get method, and it's going to paint the screen again. So the second time it comes through, I'm calling the cache. I go out to the cache and I check to see if the record's in cache. The record is in cache. So instead of going back to the BLL, I'm just going to return it back from cache. You see that I did a short circuit. I don't have to go to the BLL, go to the DAL to get the volunteer record that hasn't changed since the last time I used the information. The cache is kept on the client side, 90% sure. So in other words, you don't even have to go back to the server to get to that cache. Even if it's kept on the server side, it's still a heck of a lot better than going back to the database for that information. Real quick, let's go back to when I added to the cache. It's a long method. There's a few different parameters. The first two are the most important. The stuff that's kept in cache is kept string and object. This is the key that you're trying to reference the cache and the object that you want to store in cache. In this case, I'm storing an object of cvol, which is one of the domain models from Volunteer. I could put anything in there. I could put a picture if I wanted to. Any item can go into that cache. Let's take a look at cache insert and look at the definition. Okay, insert is, you can see it's overloaded. Cache dependencies. So what this means is, let's say I had two items. I had names and addresses. Well, addresses would depend on name. So if I change name, the stuff that's cached for addresses goes away. You can draw that sort of dependency in cache. So if I were to change the name, that the cache items that were kept for address go away. They'll get expired. Datetime absolution expired, time sliding expiration, the priority, the callback. These things have to do with, let's go back to the cache. No sliding expiration and 30 seconds. Okay, what this means is I put the item in cache and it's good for 30 seconds, or I'm sorry, 60 seconds. It's good for 60 seconds. Whether I used it or not, whether it's updated or not, no matter what, the garbage collector will go out after 60 seconds and will zap this record from the cache. How cool is that? So I don't have to worry about, oh, is this a 10-month-old, or I'm sorry, 10-minute-old record or a 10-second-old record? I know that after 60 seconds, it'll get a purge from cache. No sliding expiration. What that means is a sliding expiration would be, let's say your profile, your login was good for 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes you get automatically logged out. Your session time's out. Well, I don't expect that to happen if he's in. You don't have 20 minutes like the clock starts, and you have 20 minutes to use the system, and after 20 minutes you get logged off. It's 20 minutes of no activity. So what this sliding expiration says is that if the record was used or read or written in the last, let's say you had 60 seconds, if it was constantly being read and written, it would never expire. It would constantly push that expiration 60 seconds every time it was executed. This says no matter what, 60 seconds, zap that record out of cache. Really cool stuff. So when do I have to do with cache? If I insert a record, obviously I got to insert it in cache. If I delete a record, it's probably a good idea to delete that record from cache. In the method, instead of cache insert, it's like cache remove, I think. If I update a record, obviously I have to update or delete and then insert the record from cache. If I select a record, which I'm doing here, I have to check to see if the record exists in cache, and if it does, return that record from cache. Interesting stuff. Now, I talked for more than 60 seconds. I'm curious, depending on how this works, I'm going to refresh and see if it did remove it from cache. If it wasn't in debug mode, I know it absolutely would, but let's see if debug mode. Yeah, see that cache vol null? While I'm sitting here chewing the fat, it killed that record in cache and will make me go out and retrieve it again. I'm going to refresh, and it is there because that's 2 seconds, not 2 minutes. Excellent. Crash course on cache. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to insert that cache layer between the presentation layer and the business logic layer. And I'm going to keep both of those references to cache and business logic to the presentation layer and whatever layers we put on top of it, because sometimes they don't want to deal with cache. In other words, let's say the service that says find me all skills. It doesn't care about what's cached or not cached by whatever application. It wants to go directly to the business logic layer and jump over the cache. But for application purposes, I want to go from the data access layer to cache to business logic layer to the data access layer, and from there straight up. Excellent. Hope you enjoyed it.